Welcome to Excel Basics video number 21. Hey, in this video, we're following up on last video where we used VLOOKUP and pivot tables. And in this video, we want to see how to use relationships rather than VLOOKUP for pivot table reports. Yes, this is a big no symbol because in some situations, we do not want to use VLOOKUP when we're adding an extra column to a large data set. Now, last video, we had 73,000 records in our table, and we added 2 extra columns using VLOOKUP. And the problem was, and we'll see this in just a moment, is that 140,000 formulas in your Excel spreadsheet that all have to calculate. Not only does that take a long time to calculate, but it increases the size of the file. So in this video, we want to see how to use on the Data Ribbon tab the Relationships button. We'll simply make a relationship between the sales table and our country lookup table, connecting the country code in both, and we'll be able to create the same pivot table report without VLOOKUP. Now, I want to go look at what we did last video. And there's 3 different Excel files to download. There's the start file. There's the finished file, which we'll come and look at in just a moment. And there's Excel Basics 21 with the VLOOKUP example in it. And here's what we did last video. We're going to have the same data set in this video: date, product, country code, units, revenue, and cost of goods sold. That's what we'll have in this video. We'll also in this video have the country lookup table and the product lookup table. But unlike last video, we're not going to do this. Now notice if I hit F2, we used VLOOKUP to look up a country code, find a match in the first column of the lookup table, and return the country name back to the cell. Now, I want to show you something. I'm going to delete all these formulas here. There's our VLOOKUP. This is how we did it last time, Control-Enter. And I want you to watch what happens when I copy this formula down. Because just for a second, you'll see, double-click it, send it down. It has a slow reaction time because it had to calculate 73,000 formulas. Now I'm going to double-click this one. Same thing. Now, for one data set with 2 columns like this, it's not so bad. But if you have many tables and many extra columns and many pivot tables in a workbook, you can imagine that things would start to slow down. Our ability to create relationships instead of using VLOOKUP will help that dramatically. Now, before we can use a relationship, I want to understand what's really happening between the country code column in our sales table and the country code column in the lookup table. Well, of course, the first column of our lookup table has to have only one of each value. Now look, VLOOKUP is looking up MEX. Down here, VLOOKUP is looking up USA. If there were any duplicates over here, VLOOKUP wouldn't know what to do. So that's why when we create a lookup table, we have one of each item in the first column of the lookup table. Now what that means is this: USA, USA, Mexico, Mexico. There's lots of duplicates over here. That means in the country code column, there can be many of each country code. But over here, there can only be one. Similarly, in the product column, fun fly. There's lots of fun flies because we can sell as many fun flies as we want. So in the product column in the sales table, we have many products repeated. But over here, if we're going to look something up, there has to be a unique list. And of course, there's only one fun fly. Now that means there's a relationship between country code in the sales table and country code in the lookup table, and product in the sales table, product in the lookup table. And here it is. It's called a one-to-many relationship. we can have exactly one of each item in the first column of the lookup table, but of course you can have many over here. That means that for our product, we're totally allowed to look up fun fly as many times as we want over here, but there's going to be just one on the one side or the lookup table. Same with our looking up country. When it's looking up country code, there can be many over here because we can have many sales in Mexico. But of course, if we're looking something up, there's only one on the one side or the lookup table. Now, this is important because this is a one-to-many relationship. Now, this is the first time we've learned about a one-to-many relationship. We will see it today in this video. We'll also see it when we get over to Access. And every time you do VLOOKUP, you're actually using a one-to-many relationship. Now, VLOOKUP is a one-to-many whether or not you're doing exact match or approximate match. But when we're building relationships, it's going to be for exact match only. Now, I want to go look at the end result before we learn how to create these relationships. I'm going to go over to the finished file. I'm over here in Excel Basics 21 finished file. And this is our finished pivot table fields task pane. Yes, instead of one table with a bunch of extra VLOOKUP columns, we're going to be allowed to put all three tables into the pivot table field list and then simply drag country from the country lookup table down to the rows, product category from the product lookup table down to rows, and then, yes, indeed, our revenue column down to values. Now, let's go back over to our start file. Now, back over here in the start file, I want to look at this picture of the relationships we're going to create. Now, we're simply going to select both tables and tell the columns to connect in a one-to-many relationship. But this is a picture that will help us understand. Not only that, but this picture is exactly what we'll see over in Access when we study Access, which is a database program. Notice it has a one-to-many. One, that means the product column is the first column in our lookup table with exactly one item, each in the first column. And then there's this line to represent the relationship. And there's a relationship between the product column. And over here in Excel, they represent the many side of the relationship with an asterisk. Over in Access, they'll have an infinity symbol. But what it means is that we'll create this relationship for both lookup tables, and then we'll be able to have 1, 2, 3 tables in our pivot table field list and drag and drop and create our pivot table. All right, let's go see how to do this. Now I'm going to go over to the sales data sheet. I'm going to scroll down. There's some instructions at the top. Now, in order to go up to Data, Data Tools, and click the Relationships button, we actually have to convert each one of our tables to an official Excel table. Notice Relationship button isn't even available because it doesn't work unless we have dynamic Excel tables. That means this brand new feature is going to insist that you convert all of the tables to Excel tables. So if we add any records or delete any records, everything will update perfectly. All right, now we remember from video 15 how to convert tables to Excel tables. We click in a single cell of our proper data set, go up to Insert, and click on the table. Although we're never going to do that, we're going to use that keyboard there. Control-T. There's the Create Table dialog box. I'm going to click OK. Immediately, I go up to Table Tools Design, over to Properties, and we're going to name this table. I'm going to call this something smart like Sales Table, and Enter. Now I'm going to go to the Country Lookup Table, Control-T, Enter. Immediately go up to Properties, and I'm going to call this something smart like Country Lookup Table, and Enter. Now I go to the Product Lookup Table, Control-T, Enter. Immediately I go up to Properties, click in the table name, and give it a smart name like Product Lookup Table, and Enter. Once we have our 3 tables, now over in the Data Ribbon tab, Data Tools, it's totally polite. There's our Relationships button. I'm simply going to click this Relationship button. There aren't any relationships, so I click New. Now, I'm going to click the drop down, and I want you to notice there's 4 what are called worksheet tables. Worksheet table is a synonym for Excel table, meaning we converted the proper data sets using the Excel table feature. Now, why are there 4 tables? I'm going to click Escape, 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 because over on Extra Table, I added an extra table. We're not going to use this. I just wanted to show you that even though we're only using 3 tables, all of our tables in the entire Excel workbook, however many we have, will show up in lots of places that we use when we're creating relationship. Now I'm going to click the relationship button, click New, and now we want to select from Table and Related Table. Our table is always going to be our sales table. The related table is always going to be the lookup table. All right, so you just got to remember, related table, lookup table. Another way to remember this, and we'll have to learn these terms, primary and foreign, when we get over to Access and start studying databasing. Primary means there's a unique list of items in the first column of a table. Foreign means that's the many side. All right, so I'm going to select Table. That's always going to be our sales table. Now notice it says Worksheet Table, Sales Table. And now I'm going to come down to Related Table. That's our lookup table. We're going to do the country lookup table first. Notice it says Worksheet Table. All right, now this is the easy part. Both of the columns have to be country code. There's the many side, primary. That means the one side. Now, this is create relationships. We're about to create that line between these 2 tables. One to many relationship. But when I click OK, something interesting is going to happen. And what's going to happen is going to happen all behind the scenes in Excel. When I click OK, the sales table and the country lookup table will actually be imported into something called the data model. The data model is a behind-the-scenes location where it can store tables and relationships. Now, we're not going to be able to see that, but it is behind the scenes. And the amazing thing about the data model for storing tables and relationships is it's going to be dramatically smaller in size. That means file size than using VLOOKUP. Now I'm going to click OK. And you can see it's taking a second there because it actually had to import those into the data model, both the tables and the relationship. Now I will give you a behind-the-scenes look at it later just to prove that it's there. But for most of our versions of Excel, we're not going to have access to seeing it. But there is our first relationship, tables and relationship in the data model. Now I'm going to click New, select the sales table. But wait a second. Look at that. There's our sales table. And now it doesn't say Worksheet Table. It says Data Model Table. Yes, indeed, that sales table is now stored in the data model. Now I'm going to select that. And now when I come down to select the product lookup table, notice right now it says Worksheet Table. But as soon as we create the relationship, click OK, it'll be converted into a data model table. Now I'm going to go over to the column. And we want product. The product columns are the 2 columns that will connect these 2 tables. Notice it says primary. That's the one side. Foreign, that's the many side. When I click OK, this product lookup table will be dumped into the data model, and there'll be a relationship between the 2 tables. Click OK, and there we go. Now I'm going to click Close, and before we create our pivot table, I am going to show you the data model. Now, the problem is that Manage Data Model button in the Data Ribbon tab It may be grayed out in your version of Excel 2016. But if it's grayed out, you still have the data model, and you're still allowed to create relationships and build the pivot table we're going to do. If your button is grayed out, it just means you can't go look at the data model. Now, in order to have this button not grayed out, you have to have the professional version of Excel 2016, either Office 365 Pro Plus or Professional Office Package. You can also have the standalone Excel. Now, actually, managed data model relationships are only in Excel 2013 and 16. And you have to have the professional version of either Excel 2013 or 16 in order to have these two buttons and to go and look at the data model. Now, in our computer labs at school, we don't have the right version. But again, we don't actually need to go look because our ability to create relationships and use that relationship in a pivot table will work in any version, even if we can't go look at the data model. All right, I'm going to go click Manage Data Model. And because I have the professional version, I can see, sure enough, there's a preview of each one of the tables. Not only that, but up in View, I'm going to click Diagram View. And here is a visual presentation of the relationships. There's the sales table. Many, many. The line follows to the one side. You can see if I hover over the relationship, country code is connected. If I hover over the product, product is connected. Now, this view will be exactly the same view we'll see when we get over to Study Access. One-to-many relationships are very common, and they simulate VLOOKUP. Now, this is the Power Pivot for Excel data model window. I'm going to close this. And again, you don't have to have that ability to go look because those tables and the relationships will be behind the scenes in that data model. All right, so we're ready. I'm going to go over to the pivot table sheet and select cell A1. Now we go up to Insert Pivot Table or simply use our keyboard, Alt-N-V. Now I want you to notice something that's totally awesome. It says Use this workbook's data model. That is the default button that's selected if you actually have some tables in your data model. Now, even if for some reason it came selected up here, you just come down and select this. Now, I'm going to keep it existing worksheet, cell A1, click OK. And that is so amazing. We can have multiple tables in our pivot table field list task pane. Now, remember, I showed you that extra table because all of your Excel tables, whether they're in the data model or they're not in the data model, will show up in this pivot table field list. Now, how can you tell? Well, it's easy. That little black line at the top, like the field names are highlighted in dark, that means those tables are in the data model. Now I'm simply going to expand, 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 pull down the middle, pull this up, and now I can drag and drop fields from any one of our lookup tables or our sales table. I'm going to drag country down to rows. Instantly, I get a unique list of countries. Drag product category down below country in the rows area. Instantly, I get a unique list of product categories. Now I drag revenue over to values. That is simply amazing. Now, I don't like row labels, so I come up to Design. Report Layout, Show in Tabular. I'm going to come over to More button and choose a style. Right-click in the Values area. Point to Number Formatting. I'm going to select Currency, 0 decimals, get rid of the sign, click OK. Click up in Sum of Revenue, F2, and type the unit, and Control-Enter. I'm going to change the column width. And that is amazing. We created the same pivot table report without VLOOKUP, and we used relationships and the data model. Now I want to Control S to save this. And now I want to go look at the file size and compare the VLOOKUP file to this start file where we use relationships and the data model. Here is the VLOOKUP, exact same workbook, but with VLOOKUP and our pivot table. This is the start file we just created. Same exact tables, but we use relationships and created our pivot tables. And look at the file size difference. About 2 megabytes. Now, this is the file size difference for 73,000 rows. Now, that's still a small data set in the business world. In the business world, we might have 100,000, 500,000 rows. In fact, in the class after this, Business 216, we'll have millions of rows of data. And what happens is the file size difference is amplified. The fact that we're using relationships and the data model just has a huge advantage when you have very large tables. Now, in this video, we saw how to convert our proper data sets to Excel tables. Then we saw how to use relationships to create relationships. And then when we invoked a pivot table, we saw that the pivot table knew that there was a data model, and we were able to drag multiple fields from multiple tables and create our pivot table. Hey, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun, including a few more Excel basics. All right, we'll see you next video.